Bud by Herman Melville and the Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson both address the issue of justice, the former illustrating a customary rigid form and the latter addressing a revolutionary and moral-driven form. While Melville uses dialogue and similes to characterize the story's symbol of traditional justice, Captain Beer, Jefferson breaks such tradition, revealing that justice does not always have to be in laws, but can be based off of morality. This contrast gets at the heart of an ongoing debate that is still relevant in society today. Which form is better? And more specifically what I'll be talking about is which form works best in a justice system. So firstly, talking about the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson uses biblical allusions and logical syntax in order to convince people that revolting against the British government was morally just. So, assuming you all know the background to the Declaration, it's a very revolutionary document because Jefferson is trying to destroy all of the political ties between the United States and Britain, and he's trying to declare a completely new and independent country. And this is a tall order for a document to kind of convince people to do, and in order to convince people to revolt, Jefferson appeals to their moral ideas of justice, not necessarily their traditional ideas. So first, he appeals to people's religious morals by dropping kind of vague religious references, such as referring to their rights as given to them by nature's God, their creator, or the supreme judge of the world. So by kind of directly appealing to the religious people of the United States, he's able to convince them that, you know, since their God-given rights are being tampered with by a form of government or an oppressive king, then it is their duty to God to fight for their rights and revolt against the oppressive government. So, saying that their rights are given to them by their creator, he's just kind of convincing them that it's their religious duty, and it follows kind of their religious moral path to fight against the king. And for the people who are not religious, or for the people who don't necessarily buy the religious argument, Jefferson also kind of formats the Declaration in a logical form, and he is kind of he writes the Declaration syntactically using an Aristotelian form of logic called deductive reasoning. And in deductive reasoning, there is a general premise made and then evidence given so that in order to back up the general premise. And the general premise that Jefferson uses is that all people have unalienable rights, and if these rights are being abused by a certain form of government, then it is the people's duty to throw off the government that is abusing their rights. And to kind of back up this general premise and this strong statement that he makes, he adds a long list of abuses, and these longest lists of abuses are what he uses to kind of morally justify the revolution, because he's saying if the king did this, this, and this, and he's, you know, destroying all of these people's rights, and he's tampering with them, and he's abusing his own citizens, then it's the people's moral duty to throw off the government. He's referring back to the general premise that since the oppressive government is trying to take away their unalienable rights, they have a moral duty to throw off that government. And so in the Declaration, the general premise in the statement that Jefferson is making is not a traditional idea. It's not any written law, and yet he's making the statement through moral arguments, such as religion and kind of the logical deductive reasoning of the Declaration. So in a stark contrast, Herman Melville uses Billy Budd, and specifically the character Captain Beer, to demonstrate how traditional justice is used. And he's in doing so, he reveals the strain that can sometimes occur between moral and traditional justice. And so Captain Beer is a symbol of tradition in the book, and Melville expresses it by using a simile of a dike, or a wall, in kind of translating it, and also the persuasive diction of Beer at Billy's trial. So in the very first description of Captain Beer on page 62, he's described as an intellectual and bookish man, and although he's very informed, Melville is characterizing him as a man whose opinions are not willing to change and that they're very traditional, and he writes that his settled convictions were as a dike against those invading waters of novel opinions, social, political, and otherwise, which carried away as in a torrent no few minds in those days. So by comparing Vere to a kind of wall in a dike that purposely relents against like new opinions, whether they're socially or politically, Melville kind of uses that simile to characterize Vere as a man whose opinions, although they're strong and sturdy like a dike, they aren't very willing to change, and they actually repel new ideas and opinions. And he further, in this characteristic, is furthered by the powerful diction he uses in Billy's trial. So Vere was the only witness, and this allowed him to kind of influence the trial greatly, because when many men were considering letting Billy off on moral grounds, Vere stepped in and he insisted that they follow the maritime law strictly. And it's actually kind of interesting because Vere uses the same kind of logic that Jefferson did in the Declaration at Billy's trial, but he's arguing for the opposite kind of justice, traditional justice. So he makes this, at Billy's trial, he makes this kind of strong statement that our, as in he and the other judges, vowed responsibility is this, that however pitilessly that law may operate in any instances, we nevertheless adhere to it and administer it. So here he's kind of making the statement that no matter how morally obligated you feel to let Billy off, we must stick strongly to the laws that we must abide by the laws that were given, because and the because comes in the evidence, which he continues on to say that that the men must let not warm hearts betray heads that should be cool, and for the men to ignore their private conscience, which, as he pleads, should not yield to that imperial one formulated in the code under which alone we, the judges, officially proceed. So here he's kind of backing up his initial statement, and he's saying that there are these laws, and our job is to enforce these laws, not to let any kind of morality interfere. And his last kind of finishing statement is that he just states the pure facts. He says, since Billy struck a man who was superior to himself, then it is a capital crime. And he refers to something called the Articles of War, which are basically kind of the justice book in Billy Budd. And he says that according to the Articles of War, Billy must be executed. So here he's kind of, it's a very good way to show how Vere is strongly sticking to his traditions. He's not only convincing himself, but also other men to fight against their morality and to stick to traditions in order to fairly try Billy.